I'm J.R. Church. Welcome to today's analysis of the news. Gary Stimmen is here to discuss with me a sermon that was preached back in 1918 by Reverend B.B. Sutcliffe. He is a Bible teacher at the Extension Department staff of the Moody Bible Institute in Chicago, and he was one of the speakers at a prophecy conference in 1918, held just 6 months after the liberation of Jerusalem and in the last waning days of World War I. And so he asked the question in his sermon, does God have a program today? Gary is here to discuss this fabulous sermon.
Well, J.R., this is a great question. Has God a program? Hearing that question, you might say, why even ask the question? Of course God has a program. Everyone knows that. Well, J.R., it's a little bit more complex. What he's doing is posing a rhetorical question. The question is, what is God's program? And indeed, he points out that God has a program for Israel. God has a program for the nations. He has a program for the coming kingdom, and it's very clearly laid out. And by the way, if you want a concise statement of God's program, I can't recommend anything as highly as this.
Yes, I'm hoping you'll get our February 2009 edition of Prophecy in the News magazine and read this for yourself. And by the way, every month we have one of these sermons from the 1918 Prophecy Conference, and it has been a real eye-opener. In this particular one, Gary, he says, Israel, as we have heard, is to be regathered in an unconverted state. Now, this flies in the face of earlier theology.
Yes.
It says that Israel is going to receive Jesus as their Savior, and then God will bring them back to their land.
Everything will be as easy as pie, just one thing smoothly flowing into another, no problem. Now, this is interesting in view of the time that this lecture was delivered, right after World War I, peace in our time. Everyone was saying, this is the war to end all wars. We're moving into a great era of peace, and it would stand to reason that Israel would be part of that program. Israel will slip back into the country, form a wonderful government there, awaiting the coming of their Messiah, and everything would flow smoothly, right?
Yeah. That's not exactly the way Sutcliffe puts it. He says they're going to make a deal with the Antichrist, Gary.
Yes,
The
indeed.
Antichrist is going to build a temple. And then 3.5 years later, in the middle of the tribulation period, he says the time of Jacob's trouble will set in with the abomination of desolation and that the annihilation of the Jewish people, that Israel will be the target of the world. So they're going back home to suffer.
And J.R., he has some amazing words. In fact, I'd like for you to read them to our viewers at this time. He describes the Antichrist as a man of education, and you've got those words over. This is amazing to me.
He says the Antichrist will appear after the rapture of the church. So he's pre-tribulation raptures, which, by the way, we are too, and continue to be to this day. Says he will be a man of education, a man of refinement and culture, a man of wide experience, a man clever enough to draw to himself the highest and best the world has to offer in the way of learning, intellectual power, and all that which the world considers great. As the leader of all the forces of the earth, he will set himself up as God to be worshipped. So after he consolidates his power and he becomes the president of the world or the king of the world or the leader of the world, whatever it is, this new world order they're trying to establish, he'll be the head of it. And that's when he says, this temple that I built in Jerusalem, I'm the God of that temple.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing? So Sutcliffe's sermon here is right on target to this very day. Even in Israel, they're having discussions on whether it should be a secular state or a religious state.
The argument goes on, not just in the world, not just in the church, but in Israel. The argument is, shall we have a religious government or shall we have a secular government? And we're talking about fighting words here, J.R. There are passions on both sides. In Israel today, we've just had the election effectively between Bibi Netanyahu and Tzipi Livni, and a clearer division cannot be imagined. One side believes in a two-state Israel. That's the Tzipi Livni faction. The other side believes in Israel with Jerusalem as its capital, as standing sovereign, awaiting the coming of their Messiah. The battle lines are firmly in place right now. And by the way, all the way back in 1918, Sutcliffe saw this.
Yeah. And today, by the way, in the light of this difficulty, the problem between what kind of government we're going to set up, when Israel is actually languishing politically, Iran has turned on its nuclear power plant.
Indeed. I have a little news note here from Debka file dated February 25th, 2009. The preliminary phase of Iran's first reactor built with Russian help at the southern town of Bushehr was marked by a ceremony on Wednesday. Well, our sources, it goes on, report that Iranian nuclear teams will first activate the 1,000-megawatt reactor sections in sequence with the help of advanced Russian computers. Just keep talking about those Russian things there, Russian technology. Where do we read about that in the Bible, J.R.?
Ezekiel 38.
It sounds like Gog is edging his way right down into the Middle East.
And so Iran is sticking a finger in Netanyahu's eye. At the same time, Syria is moving troops down into the Golan to test Israel's mettle as well.
And this comes on the heels of the election. Israel is trying to set up a unity government, and who should start stirring and muddying the waters but Bashar Assad? Washington and Jerusalem are bracing for a flare-up on the Syrian and Lebanese borders with Israel as the International Tribunal for Prosecuting Rafik Hariri assassins prepares to start sittings next Sunday. The Rafik Hariri trials are going on at the very same time as Israel is attempting to form a government, and Assad is saying, well, I'm going to exert a little force from my direction. J.R., peace is nowhere on the horizon.
Yeah. So we're moving very quickly toward the tribulation period. We don't know exactly when that will be, but you need to keep your eyes on the Middle East because that's where it's all happening. So in our February edition of Prophecy in the News magazine, we have this article, Has God a Program, by Sutcliffe. And in our next edition, March 2009, which is now in the mail, we have an article on Does This Truth Paralyze or Energize by Herbert McKenzie, pastor of the Gospel Church, Cleveland, Ohio. This is the 1918 Prophecy Conference. So we're winding down now toward the final evening of the conference as these two men delivered their messages, and this one is in our March edition. By the way, in this one, the February edition, we have our first installment on the ancient book of Enoch. And in this one, our second installment, March 2009, on the book of Enoch, the ancient book of Enoch, part 2. For the next 10 months, we're going to be dealing with the book of Enoch. We hope you'll get these. Call the phone number at the bottom of your screen or order it off of the website here, and you will be glad you did. As you read these articles, it will get your adrenaline flowing. It'll get you stirred up about the second coming of Jesus Christ. Final word, Gary?
Well, the final word, by the way, when you study the book of Enoch as presented in the magazine, you'll discover that Enoch was a prophet who believed in the tribulation. Isn't that amazing? All the way back before the flood, he was prophesying that there would be a tribulation.
Yes, in several places. He says that this is written to those people who are living in the tribulation period. So, get the magazines. I'm J.R. Church and Gary Stearman. We'll see you next Monday with our analysis of the news. Have a good weekend.